Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. We're now going to see whether Mr. Millett has any further questions for our witness, Mr. Moore. So I'll begin by checking that Mr. Moore is there. He can see me and hear me, I hope. Hello, Mr. Moore.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I can see you and hear you clearly.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, we'll now find out if Mr. Millett has some more questions for you. Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do. We were looking at a document before the morning break at BBA 409596. You'll recall that this was an email about the FAQs. I'll wait for it to come up. I'm going to ask for another document to be put up on the screen at the same time, namely CTAR 6043. Now, you will remember this morning, Mr. Moore, that you and I were examining the letter on the left of the screen, the email from Richard Beale of the 6th of July 2017 to you, John Albon and Simon Rowe, about the employees who had raised some concerns relating to FAQs regarding Grenfell Tower. Now, I'd like just to explore with you a little bit more what those FAQs were, because I think you had some concerns that you won't be showing the right ones. If you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that there's a document which starts at the top, BBA certification and what it means. And then if you look down, you can see halfway down the screen, you can find out more about this and the BBA from our website. And then underneath that, it says BBA statement relating to all inquiries regarding BBA certification and the fire testing of products. If we go to page 2 in that document, you can see at the top of that page, it says frequently asked questions relating to Grenfell Tower. The first question, what is the status of a BBA certificate? And then halfway down the page, 2/3 of the way down the screen, you can see there's an update, 4th of August 2017. See Q&A 14 for updated position, and then there are further Q&As below that. Now, my first question is this document on the right of the screen the FAQs in respect of which the employee had raised the concerns, as recorded in the email on the left of the screen?
I don't know if it is the same, but there were FAQs on the website, and you did point out some other ones, I think 2 local authorities. So I'm not sure which of the 2 are being referred to.
All right. Do you know how long the FAQs, as it were, or Q&As, had been on the BBA website before the update on the 4th of August 2017?
No, I don't, I'm afraid.
All right. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further, if we look at halfway down page 2, we can see that in the middle of the page, there are 2 paragraphs just above update 4th of August. Do you see?
Yes.
And I want to show you the first of those. Says, the certificate has remained in its current form since issue in 2008. As stated above, there have been no significant regulatory changes that would have required a reissue of the certificate. And my question there is, well, if you look actually on the left-hand side of the screen, before I get to the question, you can see that the concern raised by the employee is in item 2, no significant regulatory change which leads to certificate change, false. And Mr. Beale has put in, there have been a number of regulatory changes since 2008 which would have led to a change in the certificate being updated and changed. For example, following review of report S153729 of 2014, in which the BBA sent report and contract which highlights regulatory changes. The contract was not followed up and thus certificate was not updated. Web statement gives the impression that the certificate is up to date. Do you agree that in the paragraph I've shown you, in the FAQs so far, the web statement does give the impression that the certificate is up to date when it wasn't.
I don't believe there were significant regulatory changes. I'm sure the inquiry can confirm that, but that seems to be the key part of the sentence. If it was the case that there had been significant regulatory changes that would have required a reissue of the certificate, then clearly that statement is not accurate. But I can't agree unless I'm aware whether there were significant regulatory changes that would have required a reissue. Can you help me?
Well, let me try it this way. You told us this morning, very helpfully in your evidence, that at some point, you weren't sure whether it was before or after the fire, but at some point, there had the BBA had arrived at a consensus because of the filler debate, if I can use a shorthand. A panel such as Reynabond PE 55 had to comply both with the combustibility requirements under section 12.7 and the requirements of diagram 40. Remember that?
Yes.
Now, that may not have been a regulatory change, but it was certainly, wasn't it, a change in opinion on the part of the BBA about what the regulations meant and how they should be applied?
Well, I think that's a different question to whether there had been significant regulatory changes with respect. So I'm not sure that statement is, as the whistleblower suggested, misleading. It doesn't strike me that way, but that must be a matter for others to judge. So I don't think that's necessarily incorrect.
Let me just pin you down if I can. Would you accept that if in fact the BBA had come to the opinion that there was a double requirement in approved document B for products such as Reynabond 55, namely satisfaction of section 12.7 to show that it was limited combustibility because it had a PE core, and also satisfaction of diagram 40, either by achieving class 0 or class B or better, then that new view is something that is not reflected in the paragraph I've been reading to you on the right of the screen. The certificate has remained in its current form, etc. Is it?
I can agree. It is not reflected in that paragraph, but I don't believe that amounts to being a significant regulatory change. The capital R of regulatory suggests it's statutory instrument or a law. So I'm not sure I could agree with your assertion.
Right. So literally, I understand what you're saying, but the spirit of what's being imparted here wouldn't be accurately represented, would it, if in fact the BBA had decided that the building regulations now required a double requirement as opposed to the single requirement implied by the certificate?
Well, I think in the nature of FAQs, that's a distinction that would take some clarification there. On balance, I don't think I'm persuaded, but if there had been a change in the law significantly in that period, and the BBA had made this statement, then I would agree with you. But on balance, I'm not able to agree with you at the moment.
All right, I'm not seeking to persuade you of anything. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what you're prepared to accept. But looking at the next one down, it says we can confirm that certificate 08/4510 Reynabond architectural wall cladding panels has been the subject of regular 3 yearly reviews by the BBA since its update. The complaint by the whistleblower employee on the left-hand side of the screen is item 1. I showed you this earlier. Certificate is subject to regular 3 yearly reviews is correct but misleading. And it goes on to say reissues that should have been carried out have not been undertaken, so certificate is out of date, i.e. certificate refers to building regulations and NHBC regulations which are out of date and does not refer in any way to updated regulations. Now, leaving aside the reasoning there, it is right, isn't it, that a reissue should have been carried out far earlier than it had been in 2017?
I think I don't know the exact chronology, but I think that should be a factual matter. If reviews were not carried out regularly at 3-year intervals, then that statement is not correct.
And then if we could go down, please, a little bit further in the document on the right-hand side of the screen, please, to page 3. I'd like just to show you one paragraph towards the bottom of the page there. It's the penultimate paragraph, and it says this, just read with me. The standard version was also tested to the British Standards BS 476 Part 6, 1989, and to BS 476 Part 7, 1997. When taken together, this means that this product can also be categorized as Class 0 by the building regulations. Now, I think you accepted earlier, but let me just put it to you again. It's correct, isn't it, that the BBA had never seen any test data showing that the standard version of Renault 55 PE had been tested to standards BS 476 Part 6 or 7.
Again, I think that's a matter of fact. If the standard version wasn't, and I'm not aware that it was, if the standard version was not subject to that process, then it's not accurate to say that in this document.
Indeed. And can you account for why this document did say that the standard version had been tested to BS 476 Part 6 and 7?
Again, I can't. As before, when we looked at this morning, above it is the European classification reference. And again, I just feel that sometimes people conflate the two. So if one has achieved one categorization or classification, it is assumed ergo that the other must apply. That's all I can think of, because I think it's twice we've seen that today. But I don't know is the answer.
Well, leave aside the European classification. On the assumption that the standard version had never been tested at all to BS 476 Part 6 or 7, and on the similar assumption that the BBA had never seen any evidence of any such tests, do you accept that the statement made there is erroneous and misleading?
On the premise that you've put, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I've got no further questions for this witness, and therefore it remains for me to thank you, Mr. Moore, very much for coming to the inquiry and for assisting us with our investigations. We're extremely grateful to you. Thank you.
Forgive me, is it possible I can just make, there are 4 points I would like to make it possible about how organisations like the BBA can be helped in the future. Is it possible to have a minute to do that, or is it
have a minute to do that? Mr. Moore, you can have a minute to do that, although we've got another witness waiting to be heard, so I think I must ask you to keep it quite brief. Yes,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my 4 points are as follows. The first one, organisations like the BBA need to understand that it is more likely than not that some of their clients under commercial pressure will behave unethically. And therefore the systems that the BBA and organisations like have it about gathering intelligence about malpractice need to be more developed. That's point number 1. Point number 2, to help the BBA in that role, the current commercial arrangement about contracts is too weak. Or the worst that can happen is you tear up a contract and walk away, but the public can still be at risk. I believe that you have received a submission, which I endorse, from the BBA, that deliberately misleading a certification body through act or by omission and failing to disclose relevant evidence should be a criminal offence, because that contract is too weak as it is.
Right.
Thirdly, that testing, safety-related testing, should be mandatory. and periodically. It shouldn't be a matter of good practice that some can adopt and some can't. It needs to apply to everybody, and all certification bodies are under the same requirement to have this happen, so that there's no race to the bottom if some do it and some don't. Fourthly and finally, that every organisation that has safety-related products that it manufactures, it must have a whistleblower scheme in its organisation as part of its conditions of operating, and that auditors and regulators review how that whistleblowing policy is being managed and whether there are disclosures coming from it. And there is a prescribed body with responsibility for construction products to whom those disclosures are collated and assessed to provide a picture of intelligence about the ethical health of the industry and able to act upon it in a structured and coherent way. In my opinion, those things are not sufficiently evident, and I would ask if the inquiry thinks there's any merit in what I've said, would it give those points consideration?
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. And I can assure you we will take your points into consideration when we come to making recommendations in due course. For the moment, it just remains for me to thank you very much on behalf of myself and the panel for coming to give us your evidence. It's been really helpful to us to hear what you have to tell us, and we are very grateful indeed. So thank you very much. And now you are free to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we shall now have a short break while we organise ourselves for the next witness. Welcome back, everyone. We're now ready to meet our next witness, who is Mr. Christopher Hunt of the BBA. And my first task, as always, is to check that Mr. Hunt can see me and hear me and is in contact with us. So, Mr. Hunt, are you there?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I understand that you are willing to make the affirmation, and that should appear on your screen in front of you. Have you got it there?
I have.
Good. Then could I ask you to make the affirmation by reading the words on the screen?
Yes. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Now, before we get to the point of actually putting some questions to you, there are just one or two things I need to cover. First of all, can you confirm that you're alone in the room from which you're giving your evidence?
I can.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you have no documents or other materials with you?
I can.
And can you confirm that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you which is capable of receiving messages?
Yes, I don't have any either of those things.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I hope we shan't have problems with sound or vision. You're never quite sure, but if we do, we'll have a short break while the technical support team iron them out. We shall have a scheduled break during the course of the afternoon. We would normally take it about 3:15. I'm going to suggest that we take it a bit later than that today, perhaps 3:30 or shortly thereafter. If you feel that you need a break at any time, will you please indicate that, and we'll do our best to accommodate you. All right? Now, before I invite counsel to put some questions to you, is there anything you'd like to ask me or anything you'd like to raise?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Well, in that case, I'm going to invite Ms. Troop to ask you some questions. Yes, Ms. Troop.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, good afternoon. Before I start, could I check first, please, that you can see and hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
All right. Can I start then by thanking you for attending this public inquiry to give evidence? It is very much appreciated. I'm going to ask a couple of things of you. Firstly, if you have any difficulty understanding any of the questions that I ask, please just say so and I can put the question again or put it in a different way. I'm also going to ask you to try to ensure that you keep your voice up because there is a transcriber on the call who's taking down all of your evidence, and it's important that she hears it. And then lastly, for the same reason, if you're going to answer yes or no to a question, please try to do that in words and not with a nod or a shake of the head, because obviously that cannot be recorded on the transcript, all right?
Okay.
Mr. Hunt, you provided a witness statement to the inquiry, yes?
Yes.
If we can get that up on the screen, please. It's at BBA 30111087. We're just going to take a look at that together. Just looking at the first page, is that your witness statement?
Yes, it is.
If we can go through, please, to page 32, you'll see that there's a signature there at the bottom. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that your signature?
It is.
And we can see that your witness statement is dated the 20th of January 2020, yes?
Yes.
Have you read your witness statement recently?
Yes, I have.
Can you confirm that the contents of it are true and accurate?
Yes, I can.
And lastly, have you discussed your statement or your evidence with anyone before coming here today?
No, I haven't.
Thank you. All right, if we go now, please, to page 2 of your witness statement, I'm just going to take you through some of your roles at the BBA and your training. And if we look, please, at the table you've provided to us there, in the top line, here you're setting out your own qualifications and training, yes?
Yes.
And in the top line, you tell us that in 1985, you obtained a Bachelor of Science in Physics and Acoustics from the University of Surrey, is that right?
Yes, I did.
And then if we go down, please, to paragraph 5 on the same page, you can scroll down a little. We learned there that you joined the BBA in 1986 as a project manager or product assessor, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And you say there, in relation to that role, looking at the first bullet point, that you performed assessment, testing, factory production control, and evaluation of construction products with a focus on windows, doors, cladding and curtain walling, heating, plumbing, and drainage products. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
At the second bullet point there, you say that during the course of that role, you also learned the assessment, certification, inspection, and testing functions, yes?
Yes.
And then if we go on down, please, to paragraph 6, we can see that in 1989, you moved to the role of section head at the BBA. Was that a promotion, Mr. Hunt?
Yes, it was.
You remained in that role until 2007, we see. And I think, is this right? You say there that you were the technical lead and managing the BBA's windows and doors certification business. Yes?
Yes. There was a lot of work on windows and doors at that time, and
Yes.
I became the technical lead in that sort of area.
I see. And you say that in that role you were managing 4 product assessors. Can you help me? Is the role product assessor and project manager the same thing?
Yes, I think at that time when I was section head, the job title was product assessor. Then I can't remember exactly when this was, but it became the role name changed to project manager. Essentially, they were the same roles.
Yes, I see.
It was a change. Yeah.
Thank you. We move over to page 3 of your witness statement now, please, into paragraph 7. We can see that in 2007, you moved into the role of head of approvals, yes?
Yes, that was head of approvals for the physics, what was called the physics team.
The physics team, I see. What did that cover?
That it was made up of it was a new team, essentially, approvals team. There was quite a big reorganisation at the BBA at that time to combine a number of smaller sections into larger teams. So
yes,
that was a combination of the section that I was head of previously, windows, doors, and associated products, with another section that dealt more with insulation and ventilation products.
I see. Thank you. So looking at what your role as head of approvals involved, you say there that it included responsibility for product certification. This is in the 3rd line of paragraph 7, including Agrément and ETAs of windows, doors, insulation, ventilation, and other building fabric products. Yes?
Yes.
And at your first bullet point there, staying at paragraph 7, you say that you were responsible for contract review, assignment of work, test and assessment method development, certification decisions, and audit of project files, yes?
Yes.
And I think in that role, yes, in the 2nd line of paragraph 7, you tell us that you were then managing 12 project managers.
Yes, approximately. It went up and down a little bit during that period, but it was about that number.
Yes. Did those include George Lee?
It did, yes.
What about Simon Lloyd?
I think, no, I don't think I ever managed Simon. He'd already, I think, left the BBA before I took up that role.
I see. Going down now, please, to paragraph 8, you tell us that in 2010, you moved into a different role, which is called Development Project Manager. And there are no details there. Could you just tell us, well, firstly, do you know when in 2010 you moved into that role, Development Project Manager?
I don't exactly. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact date.
No.
It may be something that BBA will probably have on file for personnel records. I think, just from memory, I'm thinking it would be maybe April time, but I could be wrong on that.
And Mr. Hunt, I'm sorry, just going back up to paragraph 7, please, and to the third line in your witness statement. What is an ETA?
Oh, sorry, that is a European technical approval.
I see. Thank you. All right. Going back now, I'm so sorry, to your next role, which is development project manager. Could you just give us a very brief idea of what that role involved?
Yeah, it was mainly so outside the mainstream operations teams. It was looking at future work, particular projects that needed developing before they could go into the operations teams. Mainly to do with a lot of the emphasis at that time was on sustainability and sort of various schemes associated with that, carbon saving. The Green Deal came in at that sort of time, which was a energy efficiency scheme. So there was quite a lot of things going on, and it was something that I found interesting. So I decided to take up that role.
I see. Did that role, just to be clear, involve any involvement with the certification of products or approving certificates?
Not directly, no. I mean, ultimately, it had a connection, obviously, with the BBA's operational activities, but it was more things looking to the future than the sort of the general run of projects.
Yes, I see. All right. If we move down now, please, still looking at page 3 of your witness statement to page 10. No, I'm so sorry, to paragraph 10. You explained to us there that you left the BBA in December 2015 and moved to employment at the BRE. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Are you still employed at the BRE?
I am indeed.
In what role, in summary? What does your role involve?
In summary, I'm a senior certification project manager working in the security team at BRE. So my role mainly to do with testing and certification of physical security products.
I see. Does it involve the testing and certification in relation of products in relation to fire at all? No,
the team is the focus is essentially entirely on security, either physical or electronic.
I see. All right, let's move on to your training. If we move down now, please, to paragraph 11 on page 4 of your witness statement. You explained there that when you first joined the BBA in 1986, there was no formal training. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's fair to say. There wasn't a formal in sort of induction training that is more typical these days, but that was 1986. So yeah, that's probably fairly normal.
And you say there that your knowledge of the building regulations developed over time and within your role at the BBA, yes? Yes,
generally you build up knowledge in particular product sectors as you were introduced to them, and as you gained experience, and effectively, I suppose the training was mentoring by experienced members of staff.
Yes, I see. All right, let's look at paragraph 12, where you're asked about any training you had in relation to the requirements of the building regulations for the use of combustible materials in buildings over 18 meters. And you say there, just starting halfway through the first line, prior to my role as the head of approvals, my knowledge on combustible materials would have been limited. Do you see that?
Yes, I'm just
we're at paragraph 12, and I started reading just halfway along the first line at the word prior.
Yes, I've got it. Yeah.
You then go on to say, in summary, that you had access to a wealth of knowledge and a support structure around you, and ad hoc training on specialist subjects from other staff. Yes?
Yes.
Can I ask this, when you say prior to my role as the head of approvals, that your knowledge on combustible materials was limited, what about after that, when you stepped into the role of head of approvals of a department which included the certification of insulation products?
Yes, so obviously it was a fairly steep learning curve. I did endeavour to learn as much as I could as the work permitted, really, and as we move forward.
Yes. From whom did you learn? Can you remember? Was there any particular person to whom you looked for advice or support?
At that time, if I remember correctly, a lot of the focus internally at BBA and externally for fire-related expertise was the technical manager at the time, who I believe was Brian Haynes.
I see.
So most of the knowledge embodied within BBA was Brian, and he would sort of look after that, and he would be the first port of call generally for any issues on fire, and then he would generally, either contact external contacts or suggest that the member of staff contacted somebody specific externally.
Yes. Did you consult Brian Haynes on fire in relation to any certificate during your time as head of approvals? Do you remember?
I would have thought so. I can't remember sort of absolute specific cases of that, but yes, and anything fire related that was that I wasn't sure about or felt needed some more input, probably Brian Haynes would be the first port of call at that time.
And can you tell me, as head of approval, so during your time in that role, what was your knowledge, if any, of the BS 8414 test series?
At that time, I was certainly aware of those standards. I think I knew some of the background, if you like, as to why they were there, and what they were meant to do.
What did you understand that they were meant to do at the time?
As a way of testing, a facade fire scenario of a system, rather than a component or a particular product. It was a way of testing an assembled installation, but I wouldn't pretend to know any great depth as to the intricacies of the standard.
I see. What about the criteria in BR 135?
I think at the time I'd have been aware of that. I probably would have read it at the time. I don't know how deep my understanding would have been at the time, and I can't at this point, sort of years later, I can't remember the details, but certainly I would be aware of BR 135, and that it is referenced. It was referenced within the building regulation approved document at that time.
Yes. Did you know, do you think, in the period that you were head of approvals, so 2007 to 2010, that test data from a test to BS 8414 had to be assessed against criteria in BR 135? I
believe I would have done, yes, because they sort of went hand in hand in that way.
Yes. And just going back to what you said a few moments ago about Mr. Haynes and his perhaps technical expertise. In 2007, when you began in your role as head of approvals, was Brian Haynes a qualified fire engineer? Do you know?
I don't believe, I'm almost certain he wasn't. And I'd worked with Brian for many, many years, really from the start of my career at BBA. I don't think he would ever have described himself as, he certainly wouldn't have described himself as a fire engineer. And I don't think he ever would have really described himself as an expert, as a fire expert.
Right.
I don't think.
Is it fair for me to say then that he had fallen into that role in a way of being consulted on fire at the BBA, despite perhaps not having the qualifications to call himself an expert in that area?
Yes, I believe so. I suppose as a bit of background, perhaps, I think that was something that tended to happen at the BBA at that time. You know, a lot of the work at BBA of project managers, you know, product assessors, is a fairly generalist sort of role, because you're looking at a wide range of performance aspects. That is the nature of BBA certificates. So but you would build up expertise, you know, perhaps not formal qualifications, but certain individuals, and it wasn't a huge organisation at that time, would probably be either willingly or unwillingly be given the mantle of the BBA sort of authority, if you like, on that particular aspect of performance. And I think Brian, whether he won, I don't know whether that was his choice, but I think he ended up occupying that space.
I see, that's helpful, thank you. I'm going to go on now to ask you about Kingspan, and in particular the BBA's certification of their Cooltherm K15 insulation product. So I want to look first with you just briefly at the first issue of the BBA certificate for that product. If we can go please to BBA 6038. I'm going to come back to look at the content of the certificate with you, Mr. Hunt, but for now I just want to look at the first page. If we look at the top right-hand corner, we can see that this is Agrément certificate 084582, and we can see that it's for Cooltherm K15 rain screen insulation board, yes?
Yes.
And then if we go please to the bottom left-hand side of the document, we can see that the date of first issue is the 27th of October 2008. Yes?
Yes.
We then see next to the date two signatures. The first, I think, is yours, is it?
It is, yeah.
As head of approvals physics. And then the second signature is that of Greg Cooper, who was the chief executive at the time.
Yes.
Are these particular signatures included on the certificate because you and Greg Cooper as chief executive ultimately held responsibility on behalf of the BBA for this certificate and its content?
Yes, this was a relatively, I think at that time, there was a change in format of BBA certificates. I think around the same time as the larger approval teams were created. I think prior to that, I think the only signature that appeared on the certificates was the chief executives. So this was something that came in at that time. So yes, I think yes is the simple answer to that. Now, quite how in certification terms, you know, when you've got two signatures, one generally is sort of recommending certification, and and then the second one is the actual certification decision, final, authority of issue.
Yes. Is it fair for me to say, just trying to understand what it denotes, is it fair for me to say that your signature there as head of approval denotes that you have approved the certificate and its content for issue, in simple terms?
Yes, I think it's recommending that the certificate can be issued.
Yes. All right, can we go please to it's the third witness statement of John Alban, which is at BBA 30-10751 and to page 8. There's just something in that witness statement that I want to look at with you, Mr. Hunt. Yes, so Mr. Alban has provided to the inquiry here a list of all those individuals that he says played some part in certificate 084582 for K15. And if we go please to the very bottom of that page, we can see your name there on the left as head of approvals, yes?
Yes.
And if we go up on that table, back towards the top of page 8, please, we can see that the project managers he names are Simon Lloyd initially, and then the second name is George Lee, and we see in the next column, project manager later to completion. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
We can go to it if we need to, but Mr. Alban was also asked by the inquiry in his witness statement who would have been responsible for checking the wording of this certificate. I'm going to call it issue 1 of the certificate for K15. And his answer was that that responsibility lay with you. We can go to it if we need to, but do you agree with that?
Yes, I think that would have been the wording that would have ended up in the certificate would have been my responsibility to check. Yes.
Yes. All right. In 2008, October 2008, which is when we've seen issue 1 was published, to whom did you report?
I reported to the operations manager at the time.
And who was that?
That was Martin Reed.
I see. All right. Just for clarity, in fact, so that I don't confuse myself or anyone else, there were in fact 2 versions of issue 1 of the certificate for K15. Do you remember that? Let's look at, if we go please, in fact, to your witness statement, so BBA 30-11087 and to page 8, we can see that the first issue, which I'm calling issue 1, is the one we've just looked at, dated the 27th of October 2008. Do you see that? It's in the top line.
Yes.
And then the next issue down is called amended issue 1, bears a date of the 6th of April 2010 and carries the same certificate number, yes?
Yes.
Is it right for me to say, looking at the third issue down, issue 2 of certificate 084582, that was not published until the 17th of December 2013. You had no involvement in that certificate, did you?
No, I changed role by that time.
Yes. So I'm going to focus on the top 2 certificates there, and I'm going to call them issue 1 and amended issue 1 so that I don't confuse matters. Can we look again very briefly at amended issue 1, and that's at BBA 6037, please. It looks almost identical. We can see that it's certificate 084582 in the top right-hand corner, yes?
Yes.
And then again, looking towards the bottom left-hand side of the page, we see date of first issue, the 27th of October 2008, but in much smaller letters under that, we can see the words certificate amended on the 6th of April 2010 with revisions made to Scottish building regulations references, the behaviour in relation to fire and maintenance sections, and deletion of the reference to Zurich Building Guarantee Technical Manual 2007. Yes?
Yes.
And we again see your signature and the signature of Greg Cooper, the chief executive at the time.
Yes.
Can I take it from there, or is it right that you also held ultimate responsibility for checking and approving the wording of this certificate, amended issue 1?
Yes, I would have done so, and then the chief executive would have had the authority to himself make comments or decline an issue of a certificate or request changes to it. But generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that that wasn't that common.
No. Would it be fair for me to characterise your role in terms of this certificate and issue 1 that we've just looked at as the person, were you the person responsible for the technical sign-off decision? Is that a fair characterisation?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
All right. I'm going to ask you now some questions about the process of certification. If we can go back, please, to your witness statement at BBA 30/11087 and to page 5. You were asked there, if we look at the first question at number 4 in bold, do you see that? It says, in terms of the wording of final issued certificates. Are you there, Mr. Hunt?
Yes, yes.
All right. And the question was this, the first question at 4A, who by reference to individuals and or by reference to job titles checks the wording, the overall meaning and the potential manner in which each section will be understood or interpreted. So the question is being asked in quite a general way, not about these certificates in particular. And your answer at paragraph 17 is this. I'm going to read it with you. From my recollection at the time, it was internal and external commentators to which drafts had been circulated, generally including the approvals manager, technical manager, BBA technical writers, the client, and finally the chief executive. Yes?
Yes.
Could you just take that in stages, possibly, to the best of your recollection and thinking about the period during which you were head of approval, so 2007 to 2010. First of all, looking at your answer in paragraph 17, by whom would drafts be circulated to the people in the roles you list there?
Generally, that was done by the within the sort of the technical writers function. Although I think at that time it was being, the technical writers at that time had become embodied within the approvals teams, but there was still a, if you like, a central BBA function for distribution of drafts and collation of comments on draft certificates.
Yes, I see. All right, let me wind back a little bit. Who would produce the first draft of a new certificate?
So generally at that time, and I don't think it changed radically with the move to larger approvals teams, but it, generally speaking, the draft of the certificate, the initial draft, would be prepared by the product assessor / project manager, usually in conjunction with a technical writer at that time, because the technical writers were embedded in the approvals team and were, if you like, part of that process of generating the initial draft certificates.
Yes. All right. So when a draft had been produced by a product assessor or project manager, perhaps with some assistance or some input from a technical writer, and we'll come on to that role, can you help us as to what would ordinarily be the involvement of the head of approvals in 2008, what would you do? Would a draft be circulated to you for your comments?
Yes, I believe so at that time.
Was that always the case for every certificate?
I think there was again, if I remember right, this was some time ago since I was involved with this process at BBA, but I think at that time it wouldn't necessarily be in first instance a formal circulation. It would be a relatively informal within the team. The project manager, technical writer would come up with an initial draft. They'd probably at that stage share it with the approvals manager for some input if necessary at that stage. So it was still probably a relatively informal part of the drafting at that stage.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. When you use the term approvals manager, are you talking about yourself as head of approvals?
Yes, I was talking about the general, so that would be the same process in any of those. I think there was 3 approvals teams at that time, so it would be the same process within each of those approvals teams, with their own, looking at their own subject areas, really.
Yes, so the project managers who worked under you, for example, George Lee, do I have this right? He would perhaps put together a draft and then possibly informally send it to you for your comments. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And then later would come a stage where on a more formal basis, perhaps closer to being finalised draft was circulated more widely. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So I think trying to cut to it really, was there ever I'm trying to work out whether that is what happened on every single occasion. And perhaps the best way for me to ask it is this: was there ever an occasion where you as head of approvals received on your desk or on your laptop a finalised draft certificate for approval, for checking and signing, without ever having seen a draft of that document previously or having commented on it? Does that make sense?
I think so, yes. No, I think that's correct, generally speaking. And I couldn't say for sure whether this was always the case in every situation, but my memory of the time, which, as I say, is a little while ago now, so I'm aware that it could be slightly unreliable, but I think it would generally have been the case that the head of approvals would have seen a draft, an initial draft, certainly, and probably several drafts before actually seeing the final thing.
Yes, I see. That's helpful. Can we go back to your witness statement, please, at page 5 and at paragraph 20? Actually, at the question just above, so this is inquiry question 5, you're being asked in particular there, I'll read it in fact, in terms of the veracity and or accuracy of test results cited within a BBA certificate, who, by reference to individuals and or job titles, checks the wording, the overall meaning and so on. And you say, essentially it's the same answer, in fact, the product assessor, technical writer, approvals manager, technical manager, the manufacturer, and internal and external commentators if applicable. Just to ensure that I understand you, do you mean that each of those individuals, everyone in those roles that you have listed, would have checked the accuracy or veracity of test results cited in a BBA certificate?
They would, yeah, perhaps I need to split that up in a way. In terms of checking the accuracy of test results, that would generally have been done by the product assessor or the project manager, maybe in with the approvals manager. Might have involved the technical manager if it was deemed necessary. But then in terms of the wording, so that's the actual test results themselves.
Yes.
In terms of checking the meaning of the wording, that could be a little bit wider because a BBA certificate they're quite wordy things rather than being a very short certificate, which some certification obviously is. There's very wordy things. So in terms of checking the wording and the way that could be, read, then obviously others would do that, although they might not be checking the actual test results.
Yes, I understand. So you said in that answer that checking the accuracy of test results would generally have been done by the project manager and maybe with the approvals manager, yes?
Yes. So did you say technical manager as well?
No, I think your answer was product assessor or project manager. And yes, I'm so sorry. And then you did say possibly involving the technical manager. My question really is this, and in fact, it's been asked of you in your witness statement at the next question down. The question there at the very bottom of the page we're looking at, under paragraph 20, is how are these checks carried out? And if we can go to your answer, please, which is over on page 6, you say there by draft certificate circulation to the then current BBA procedures. And you then are asked who has responsibility for the veracity and or accuracy of the test results cited. And at paragraph 22, you say data was either internal BBA test data or UCAS accredited or subject to checking in accordance with the then current BBA procedure. So my question is a very simple one. It's this: what was the procedure for checking the accuracy or veracity of test results cited in a BBA certificate? Whoever did that, what was the procedure you're referring to here?
Oh, so at the time, I think there was I couldn't tell you the number of it or a reference, but I think within the BBA's documented procedures, there was a procedure for checking accuracy of test results.
Yes, fine. What was it?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't recall in detail. It was a written procedure, mainly sort of, and it gave you the how you should check those results, based on the provenance of the data, whether it was UCAS accredited or not, whether it was felt to be representative of that product. There was quite a number of different aspects to that procedure, but
I see.
I'm sorry, I can't remember what the reference number of that procedure was at the time. It would be in the BBA's manuals from that time.
Fine. No, there's no reason you'd remember the reference number. Would those procedures or the steps that you've listed involve actually reading the test reports on which the test results cited in a BBA certificate were based?
Yes, generally, yes.
Would there be any other way to check the accuracy or veracity of test data?
I think it would depend on the type of testing.
Would it? How so? Let me put it in this way. In what circumstances could you check the accuracy or veracity of any test data without reading it?
I think, the data would need to be read, yes.
Yes. All right, thank you. Just looking, please, at your answer at paragraph 22, there's something I would just like to make clear with you. You say there, data, and this is a reference to test data, was either internal BBA test data. What does that mean? What would internal BBA test data be?
So that, perhaps some explanation would be helpful here. I'm sorry I didn't detail it more in my witness statement. At that time, I think it was fair to say that most test data, particularly on a lot of aspects like durability testing, quite mechanical testing, a lot of testing was actually done within the BBA's own laboratories. And in that case, the test data was generally taken to be acceptable and accurate because it was generated by the BBA themselves.
Yes, I see. And then UCAS accredited, looking again at paragraph 22 of your witness statement, that means test data from a UCAS accredited test house, does it?
Yes. So as a if you like, as a hierarchy of acceptability, shall we say, internal test data was perhaps the easiest to accept. Failing that, then for tests that were the BBA didn't perform themselves, it would be UCAS accreditation of the laboratory to the standard that was of interest would be the next step down.
Yes. Failing
that, then there was some checking guidance, I think, in the procedure, which was then also another route to accepting data.
Yes, I see. But in terms of the hierarchy of acceptability that you've described, do I understand you correctly to be saying this? If it was internal BBA test data, it needn't be subject to further checks because it was already your data, yes?
Essentially, yes, I think. I mean, there might have been some caveats to that, but I think generally, yes. It was BBA test data and therefore generally accepted as being accurate.
Yes. And then does the same apply to UCAS accredited test data? Because you say it may just be the wording, but you say data was either internal BBA test data or UCAS accredited or subject to checking. So do I take it from that UCAS accredited test data was not subject to checking?
I think it was still subject to checking, that it was an appropriate standard and it related to and it related to the product in question. But in terms of the actual accuracy of the data, generally speaking, UCAS accredited labs to the standard that was of interest would be accepted.
Yes, I see.
Without further checking.
Yes, all right. I want to ask you now, please, about how decisions about a certificate or test results to be included were documented during the process of certification. And to try to take that shortly, if we can go again, please, to the third witness statement of John Alban, which is BBA 30-10751, and to page 5. If we look at paragraph 18, please, Mr. Hunt, I'm just going to read this with you. He says that during the drafting process, the checks made and subsequent authorizations are documented on a certificate traveller log. The layout and style of this document has evolved over time, but the principle has always been to ensure that the responsibility for all stages of the process is documented, and that a certificate can only be issued after the content has been checked and the publication formally authorized by a suitably experienced and competent individual. My first question is this: do you agree with him that that was the principle in operation during your time as head of approvals?
Yes, I believe so. That seems to accord with what I think would have been the process at that time.
All right. Before the first before issue 1 of the certificate for K15, had you at any stage had any prior involvement with Kingspan or in particular with certification for any of their insulation products?
I can't remember exactly. I think there was certainly quite a number of Kingspan products, I believe, already certificated at that time.
Yes.
There would have been quite a number of Kingspan products or assessment projects related to Kingspan products, I think, at that time. You know, they were big, they're a big manufacturer of construction products, particularly in the insulation sector, and there would have been quite a number, I think. I don't know what that would have been exactly.
No, I see. All right. Mr. Lee, George Lee, who we seem to have established was the project manager for issue 1 of the K15 certificate, has told us in his witness statement, I don't think we need to go to it, but he has told us that he was, or that most of the Kingspan insulation products which were certificated by the BBA at the time were being worked on by him. So would you have been supervising his work on those insulation certificates, other Kingspan products?
In terms of, overall, in terms of the management of the team, I would have been supervising him. In terms of perhaps a technical capacity, now I don't know about formal competence and whether that comes up, but he was much more experienced than I was in terms of experience of insulation products and the assessment and testing of those than I would have been.
What leads you to say that he was much more experienced than you were in those areas?
He was in the previous section, headed up by Sonia Marshall, which was the BBA sort of, if you like, insulation and ventilation section. So they dealt with really all those products up until that time. So until the combination of the approvals teams, the project managers that came across from that team were the ones with the experience on insulation products. And I think probably at that time, George would have been, Sonia Marshall retired. I can't remember exactly when that was, but that would have been probably around that time. So George was the, if you like, most experienced on insulation products. Now, I don't know how that would be defined in formal competence terms.
No. All right, that's helpful. Can you remember when you first became aware that a certificate was going to be prepared for Kingspan's K15 product? I think, well, I would have, when I became the head of approvals and the projects that were on the books, if you like, in the Sonia's section, that was one of the projects that would have come across, and I believe it had already been going some time before then. So I guess the awareness would have been at the time when the new approvals team, as it were formed, and the projects were already on the books, shall we say. Yes, I think that's right, that it was an ongoing project at the time you became head of approvals in 2007, and we'll come on to look at some correspondence about that. Did you see, given that it was an ongoing project, did you see a contract or agreement between the BBA and Kingspan in respect of a certificate for K15 at any stage?
I can't be absolutely sure of that, because at that time a lot of stuff was still on paper. I think so. There would have been obviously a file with the contract on. Whether I would have looked at it when the files were sort of handed over, as it were, I can't recall. The contract, I didn't have any involvement, obviously, with the production or review or acceptance of that contract. That was
All done.
Yeah, it was a few years, I think, before I was involved.
Yes. All right. When did you first discuss the matter, this a certificate being prepared for K15 with a project manager? Can you remember that?
I believe it would have been with George Lee.
Yeah.
I can't remember when it would have been. It may have been fairly early on when the approvals team was formed. At some stage, I would have become in knowledge of it, but I couldn't say when.
Yes. All right. Were there, as far as you can remember, before you came to the stage of reviewing the certificate for approval, discussions or meetings between you and George Lee as to any aspect of the content of the certificate?
I would have thought so, but I can't recall anything specific. Generally, with most projects, the project manager, product assessor would have ongoing conversations with the head of approvals as a day-to-day thing.
All right. What documents did you have available to you when you came to the stage of reviewing issue 1 of the BBA certificate for K15 for approval?
I mean, I can't remember exactly from memory, but it would have been essentially whatever was in the technical file, plus any, I don't know, notes or other material that there might have been, but essentially what was in the technical file.
And was that so ordinarily when you came as head of approvals to the stage of actually reviewing a certificate for approval and signature, is that what you would ordinarily expect to have in front of you? The contents of the technical file and any other notes or materials, I think you said.
Yes, plus any discussions or meetings or knowledge that I may have had at that time.
Yes. What about correspondence with the manufacturer? Would you expect that to be on the file?
Correspondence at that time wouldn't necessarily. Some of the correspondence, certainly letters, would have been on the file at that time. Emails, perhaps printed copies of emails, but not necessarily every email, I don't think, at that time. That may have changed at BBA subsequently. My experience obviously only goes so far.
Mr. Hunt, I'm going to pause you there just because I'm looking at the time and wondering, passing back to the chairman, whether this might be an appropriate time for a short break.
Yes, well, I think it probably would, wouldn't it, Mr. Hunt? We'll have a short break now. I think we could start again at 3:45, please. And while we're having our break, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it, all right?
I understand.
Very good, thank you. We'll see you at 3:45.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We're now going to resume hearing from Mr. Hunt. So I'm just going to check that Mr. Hunt can see me and hear me all right. Are you there, Mr. Hunt?
I can indeed, sir, yes.
Very good. And you're ready to carry on, I hope?
I am.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, in that case, Ms. Troop, when you're ready.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, I'm going to take you back to your witness statement. If we can go to that, please, at BBA 30-11087 and to page 8. If we look, please, at paragraph 31, we can see that you have been asked when it was that Kingspan first contacted the BBA in relation to the potential certification of K15. Do you see that question?
I do, yes.
And you say that you don't remember, but that you've been shown an email dated the 23rd of October 2003, which would appear to indicate first contact, yes?
Yes.
Let's go to that email, please. That's at BBA 30-11088. If we look at the top email, if we could blow that up a little bit, please, we can see an email from Ivor Meredith of Kingspan to Bob Keys at the BBA, and it's dated Friday, the 24th of October 2003, yes?
Yes.
And we can see that the subject is possible new BBA assessment, and he's attached some PDFs, one about Cooltherm K15 and one about a thermofloor product, TF70. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And then if we look at Mr. Meredith's email, he says this: Bob, as requested by Philip, please find enclosed the TF70 literature. The same situation applies to our K15, which is the same specification as K8 and K7. Could you presumably also provide a quote and timescale for this? Yes?
Yes.
Have you been referred to, or were you shown this email in the course of preparing your witness statement for the inquiry, or is it an email that you think you saw at the time in 2007 or 2008?
I don't remember it. I don't remember seeing it at the time in 2007, 2008. Yes, I believe it's the email that that I saw recently. When doing the witness statement.
Yes, and do you think it's right for me to take from this that the products Mr. Meredith mentions in the second line of his email, K8 and K7, were at that time in 2003 already the subject of BBA certificates?
They may have been. I can't recall fully from the time, but it sounds likely from that, but I'm speculating.
All right. Do you know whether after this email from Mr. Meredith, Kingspan were at any stage asked to provide any data or evidence to back up what Mr. Meredith says there, which is that K15 is the same specification as K7 and K8?
I don't remember. I can't remember if I've seen anything.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that it would have once the BBA was in contract, I think, or maybe prior is possible. I think at the time Simon Lloyd would have been the initial project manager, and Sonia Marshall would have been involved. What they saw at the time, or what was taken on, what was seen before the contract was prepared, I wouldn't know.
All right, let me put it in this way. Would you expect more to have been done by the BBA than for Ivor Meredith's word on this, that K15 was the same specification as K8 and K7? Would you expect more to have been done than for that to be accepted at face value?
I mean, normally I'm talking sort of from my own experience, I don't know for sure in this instance, but I excuse me, generally, I think that begs the question and would be explored in some way, whether that would be verbally, phone call or emails or meeting, or generally, yes, it would be explored.
I see. All right. Can we go now very briefly to a copy of the contract which was signed between the BBA and Kingspan for the certification of K15? That's at BBA 30010745. So we can see there on the cover page, it's certificate contract, and the applicant details are given at the top. That's Kingspan, yes?
Yes.
There are then some details of the subject of the contract, addresses and relevant fees. If we go on, please, to page 4 of this document, we can see that it's been signed in August 2004 on behalf of the applicant. That's the top signature. And we know that signature to be that of Ivor Meredith of Kingspan. Do you know who it is that has signed on the 16th of August 2004 on behalf of the BBA?
Yes, I think I do, but I believe, looking at that signature, I think that was a gentleman called John Miles.
I see.
Who worked in the, I think at the time it would have been called the marketing or sales and marketing department.
I see. All right. Now, given that this certificate was signed off by the BBA on the 16th of August 2004, and that we know that issue 1 of the certificate bears the date 27th of October 2008, it seems that the process of getting to an issued certificate took just over 4 years, yes?
Yes.
Do you have any idea why that was?
I mean, it is a long time. I can't recall, and he's generally longer than would be expected for this type of assessment at that time.
I see.
I don't recall what the circumstances were before I was involved, but I think it's probably fair to say, and I don't know the exact numbers, but at the time when Sonia Marshall retired and I became approvals manager, there was quite a backlog of work. There was a lot of work in the insulation sector had come in, and I think there was a lot of work on the books, if I remember rightly.
When you stepped into the role as head of approvals?
Yes.
I see. All right. And so then one of your first jobs presumably was to work through that backlog.
Yes, indeed. I don't know if this background is useful or not, but from memory at the time, I think one of the rationales between creating 3 larger approvals teams rather than a larger number of smaller sections was mainly business efficiency and to try and put it bluntly, get through the work and keep things moving.
Yes, I see. All right. In 2008, when you were head of approvals, were records kept recording who had contributed to a certificate and in what way?
Not formally, I don't think, other than names appearing on the file,
Yes.
or the technical file, and so signatures on things like contracts and documents. I think correspondence, obviously. I don't think there was a formal log as such kept. It would mainly be from those whose names were involved and come up in that way.
All right. We spoke earlier, or I referred you earlier to a section of John Alban's third witness statement where he mentioned a document called the Certificate Traveller Log. I want to look at that with you for the log for issue 1 of K15. That is at BBA 30s11090, please. Right, so we see at the top Certificate Traveller Log, and this has been filled out manually, yes?
Yes.
What is the purpose, or what was the purpose, please, in 2008 of a Certificate Traveller Log?
I think it was, if I remember rightly, this, well, in this format was relatively new when the new approvals teams were created. I think there was something similar in place before then, but I can't remember exactly how it differed from this. And I think this was, if I remember correctly, put into place just as a way of sort of keeping track of where draft certificates had got to, who'd done what on those drafts, and just to record those steps.
I see. All right. Well, let's take a look at this one together. We can see that the product name in the top line is given as Cooltherm K15 rain screen insulation board. And then under that, we see details for Kingspan insulation. On the right-hand side, the contact name at Kingspan is given as Gareth Mills. Do you see that?
Yes, I do, yes.
That's the right-hand side. And then under that, I think we see next to project manager, George Lee.
Yes.
And then Richard Ball is recorded as the technical writer, yes?
Yes.
This is something you referred to earlier, but I want to check it with you. Despite the title, technical writer, is it correct for me to say that the role did not in fact involve any technical input into the content of certificates?
Yes, in general terms, yes. It did. So it's technical, not in terms of being having any technical responsibility for the technical judgments, if you like.
Yes.
But they did have quite an input in the format of the certificate, the way that the building regulations were referenced in a sort of standard way. So they had quite a lot of input into the process, but not with a technical responsibility, but with a responsibility, I suppose, of ensuring that the consistency and the
Yes.
readability, I suppose, of the certificates, and they followed a consistent format, because that was always, could be an issue for certificates.
Yes, Mr. Hunt, the way John Alban puts it in his third witness statement, and we can go to this if we need to, is input is restricted to maintaining a consistent BBA style and correct grammar, no technical input or discretion. Does that accord with your recollection of that role, technical writer?
Yes, I think essentially, yes.
Right.
Some might have had more input than others. Some of them were quite experienced, so were quite good at picking up anomalies, or even they had no responsibility technically, but often they were certainly part of the process of kind of getting certificates in good order, as it were.
Looking back, please, at the log, in the top section, do you see on the right-hand side, under the names we've just looked at, there's a section in brackets starting JobCon FS. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we read along the handwritten section there, I think it gives the department, which is yours, physics, and then the contract number or agreement number. And then does that say 9 drafts at the end of that line?
I believe so, yes. I think I would read that as 9 drafts.
Does that indicate to you, looking at it now, that there were 9 drafts of the certificate for K15?
No, if I remember correctly, and I'm hoping I do, but I think within the electronic folders on the network drive, so I think there was various folders within that overall project folder, and I think section or folder number 9 was draft.
Oh,
I don't think it implies the actual number of drafts. It
I
implies the folder number of within the main project folder.
Yes, I see. Thank you. If we go down now, please, to section 1, certificate details, we can see that the word standard has been circled. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What does that mean?
I think that the BBA at that time had various series of certificates. So most certificates were standard, BBA, Agrément certificate. HAPAS was to do with highways,
right,
work, I think. Roads and bridges, again, was specific to sort of civil engineering work. And then ETA, as I think we mentioned, we spoke about earlier, is European technical approval.
Thank you. And then moving down, please, can you see at section 1.4, circulation type, the word follower has been circled.
Yes.
And after that, we see the words designated leader certificate number 084549.
Yes.
What does the word follower being circled denote?
Oh, okay. So think at the time it was, so it depends on the route of the circulation route that the certificate went on, and I think it could be adjusted as well. But I think essentially a leader certificate went to on a wider circulation of commentators, whereas a follower was a restricted number of people, and it was because it wasn't deemed, if you like, necessary to send it on the wider route.
Yes. All right. And then staying with section 1.4, I think that is your signature, is it? Dated the 19th of June, 2008.
Yes.
Yes?
Sorry, yes, I'll cut across you then. Yes.
No.
Yes.
All right. And then if we move down, please, to section 2 in this log. Yeah, we can see a section entitled Technical Completion of Assessment, and it reads declarations that certificate is technically complete, initials and date. The project manager there has signed. Do you know whose signature that is?
So project manager, I believe that was George Lee, but it's not, I can't be 100% sure because it's not ever so illegible.
Great. And then we see the technical writer, and that seems to read R. Ball, for Richard Ball. And then is that your signature, head of approvals, at the 3rd line?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Is it right for me to say that by signing this document, you were essentially signing off to say that you were satisfied that all the specifications within the certificate were accurate?
I believe so. Yes, at the time of in the procedure that was in place then, as far as I can remember.
And that all data requested by Kingspan had been provided?
Yes, I think that would be the assumption. Yeah.
And that all supplied test data had been scrutinised by the BBA?
Essentially, yes, I believe so.
And that all technical content had been checked as adequate and accurate?
Yes, again, I think that was the assumption there. Yes.
All right. I want to go now, please, in some more detail to issue 1. If we can go back to BBA 6038, please. And if we look at page 1, looking at product scope and summary of certificate, which is in the first light blue box at the top of the page, we can see that reads, this certificate relates to Cooltherm K15 rain screen insulation board, a rigid phenolic board with foil composite facings for use as external thermal insulation on new and existing steel frame or masonry walls. The board is used in domestic and non-domestic buildings in conjunction with masonry or weather-tight ventilated cladding systems. Does that accord with your understanding of K15 as a product at the time, as far as you can recall, that description?
Yes, as far as I can recall, yes.
What did you know about K15 at the time, whilst it was being certificated?
I knew it was part of the Cooltherm range of phenolic boards, and there was quite a family of those for various applications. I think some of them were already certificated, but I think, as mentioned earlier, I can't remember exactly which ones in which use.
All right.
Yeah, that's I suppose, is that enough?
Yes, thank you. All right, let's move on down now, please. Do you see the second heading in bold, which reads key factors assessed? So just going down the page a little. Do you see those words? Key factors assessed.
Yes, I do, yeah.
And first we have thermal performance in bold, and then condensation risk. And then the section I want to take you to is behavior in relation to fire. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
That reads, the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. So looking at the first part of that assertion, the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. My simple question is this: what does that phrase mean?
I think I would read it as it is there, but I don't know. I don't know if it had any more, if there was intended to be any meaning to it other than that it won't contribute to the development stages of fire. But it's a slightly, well, perhaps a slightly ambiguous statement.
Yes. Why do you say that it's slightly ambiguous, perhaps?
I'm not quite sure, in the context of, in the sort of context of the approved documents, I'm not quite sure what it would mean. I mean, the BBA certificates don't only cover building regulations requirements as such, but I think it was probably meant to mean that it doesn't contribute to the early stages of a fire.
Right. And do you think that was your understanding at the time that you signed off this certificate, that it was essentially intended as read, the boards will not contribute to the early stages of a fire?
One thing that having obviously not really looked at it for many years until recently, and then looking at it for the inquiry,
yeah.
I'm not quite sure. It's just as I don't know if this is okay, but just as a bit of context or background, this key factors assessed was the format of the certificate was changed around that time, or not too long before this time, and that was this key factors assessed was added in as a new feature of the format.
Right.
And was meant to be a sort of a few little quick bullet points. But I mean, thinking about it now, I'm not sure in a way how helpful it was or is. In the elsewhere in BBA certificates, it usually says somewhere, and I can't remember exactly where, that certificates should always be read in their entirety. So
yes,
it's almost we've shot ourselves in the foot perhaps by sort of having a summary, and that may lead people to not read the full certificate.
Forgive my jumping in, Mr. Hunt, and you too, please, Ms. Troop, but someone actually sat down and chose those words, I imagine. And are we to understand from your earlier evidence that that was probably Mr. Lee?
I would, to the best of my knowledge, I believe so. So
Right.
yes.
So he chose those words. Whether he was helped to choose them by anything else, we may discover at a later stage. But my next question is: you then at some point read this certificate? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes.
Did you scrutinize those words? In other words, did you read them and ask yourself, what does this mean?
I don't remember exactly how I read them at the time. Reading them, now, I'm not quite sure exactly why it was there, because normally that key factors assessed summary would be a repetition, albeit briefly, of something that appears in the main section of the certificate. So
right.
it's slightly unusual, I would say, and probably not that helpful that the wording in the key factors assessed is not mirrored in the main section. So
I understand that. My question was, did you scrutinize them and ask yourself, what does this mean? And I think your answer is you can't remember doing so. Is that right?
Yes, I think, I would have read it and scrutinized it at the time. I can't now remember what my thoughts were on that, and whether I read anything into that particularly, other than that you then needed to refer to section 7 to get the full story.
All right. Well, that I understand. It's quite a long time ago. All right. Thank you. That's helpful. Ms. Troop, on you go.
thank you. I think I understand you to be saying that you don't remember what your reaction was to that particular wording at the time, but that you would have looked at it. Do you think you understood it at the time? I appreciate that you were saying it may have been intended to be a reference to other sections within the body of the certificate, but that aside, taking those words just as they look on the front page, do you think there is anything you could have understood about the meaning of them in 2008 that you cannot see now?
In what way? Sorry.
Well, let me put it in this way. As far as you are aware, is that wording derived from any particular test standard or guidance or part of the building regulations?
I don't believe so. I might, I can't remember exactly what I would have taken from it at the time, but I think at the time and now I wouldn't necessarily take that as being any particular reference or any significance to the actual wording of the approved documents.
No. How is contribution to the development stages of a fire measured? Do you know?
Not that I can recall. No, not in any detail. I couldn't say.
No. Are you able to assist with what would need to be done in order for a definitive statement saying the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire to be correct? How would that be shown?
I'm afraid I'm not sure.
No. Do you have any idea what the scientific or evidential basis for that statement could have been?
I don't for sure. No, I would imagine it was based on some of the testing and an assessment that was in section 7. But
well,
reading it now, I think it confuses more than helps.
Yes, we'll come on to section 7. I think, let me ask you this. You were asked in your witness statement about your understanding at the time when you approved this certificate of the words limited combustibility. And if we can take a look at it if we need to, but you were simply asked what you understood those words to mean in 2008. And your answer was, I recall it was related to a definition in approved document B. Actually, perhaps we ought to look at it. That's in your witness statement, please, at page 9. So BBA 30-11087. And it's at inquiry question 22. What was your own understanding of the meaning of the phrase limited combustibility? And your answer is, I recall it was related to a definition in approved document B. Can you go any further with that answer now?
Yes, I think I can. At the time when I did my witness statement, I'd not thought about K15 for many years, and it came a little bit out of the blue, and I was struggling to recall detail. I think more recently, having heard some of the other witnesses and been a little bit more steeped in the inquiry, I have had a look back at approved document B from the time, and it is I think it is a defined term within approved document B, and I think it is defined in one of the appendices, but I can't remember which appendix it is.
Yes, fine. Do you think you would have understood what the definition of limited combustibility was in 2008 whilst you were head of approvals?
I believe so, yes. I mean, I can't be absolutely certain what my depth of understanding was of limited combustibility at the time, but I think I would have known it and recognised it as a defined term.
Yes. And do you think at the time you had a good or sound understanding of fire performance as dealt with in approved document B?
I don't, I wouldn't have claimed then or now to be any sort of expert on fire performance. I would have looked at the relevant parts of approved document B at the time. I would have some understanding of the provisions there. I would say I had an in-depth understanding, no.
All right. What was your understanding in 2008 at the time you approved issue 1 of the certificate for K15? What was your understanding of the combustibility or otherwise of the K15 product?
I think at the time I would have understood that it wasn't a non-combustible product or a product of limited combustibility.
Right.
I think I would have. I can't. It's so long ago. I can't remember exactly what my thought would have been, but I don't think I would have thought of it in that way.
No, it's understandable. It was some time ago. Just to be clear, is your evidence that you did understand in 2008 that K15 was a combustible phenolic insulation material?
I believe so. Yes, I know that combustibility is a scale of you've got non-combustible at one end, and then you've got this isn't a defined term, very combustible at the other end. So most products will lie somewhere within on that spectrum, I think.
Yes, understood. Your answer was, I believe so, yes. So just to be absolutely clear, you did understand that K15 was combustible?
I believe so, yes, combustible to some degree, yes.
All right, that being the case, can you help me to understand how it could possibly be accurate to state in a BBA certificate for that product, the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire?
I think at the time, my understanding would have, or my reading of that would have been that it's not non-combustible, but it wouldn't be one of the initial sources of the fire. It wouldn't be something that burnt readily at the very start of the fire. Once a fire was established, it may then obviously be part of that. But development, I think I probably read it as development would be the very early stages, but I can't be sure exactly how I read that at the time.
No, I'm not really asking you too much about how you read it at the time, or perhaps we'll come back to that answer. What I'm trying to understand from you in very simple terms is this: if you knew the product to be a combustible material, how could it be accurate to state in definitive terms, without qualification or caveat, the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire? It doesn't say, as you've just been through, it might not burn readily at the beginning of a fire, or perhaps once a fire is established, it might. It says the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. How could that possibly be accurate in relation to a combustible product?
Again, I think it might depend. I think I would have thought it would depend on the degree of combustibility of the product. So, obviously, I think in my thinking at the time would have been that buildings contain a lot of different products, many of which are combustible. Some products will contribute more to the development of a fire than others. I think I took that to mean that it wasn't a product that was very combustible and would contribute to the early stages of the fire. I think in my mind, development probably meant early stages, perhaps rather than later stages. But I'm in saying that I'm not a fire expert, and that may not be correct.
No. Did you ever ask George Lee what the source of or basis for that wording was? You appear, and I may be wrong, but I have the impression that you made a number of assumptions about what it might have meant. Did you ever simply go to the project manager who had written it and say, what does this mean?
I may well have done. I don't recall a conversation along those lines, but this is quite likely that I would have done. Yes, I can't remember whether that did occur and what his answer was.
No, fine. If that did occur, it must be the case, mustn't it, Mr. Hunt, given that you later signed off that wording, that he gave you some sort of satisfactory answer as to the source of or basis for that wording?
I would believe so, yes.
Do you have any idea now what that could be?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
Can you accept that, in fact, given that K15 is neither non-combustible nor a material of limited combustibility, that wording it is in fact misleading and inaccurate?
I think it could potentially be read as misleading, knowing what I know now.
In what circumstances?
Perhaps I probably wouldn't have necessarily picked that up.
In what circumstances could it not be read as misleading or inaccurate?
I think if it related to some of the content in section 7, if it was something that could be taken from some of the testing described there.
I see. Well, we'll come on to section 7. I'm sorry, a few moments ago, I did overspeak you, and I apologise for that. And you started to answer. You said, I think it potentially could be read as misleading, knowing what I know now. I'm a little confused by that answer, because as I understood it, you knew at the time that the product was combustible. What do you know now that leads you to say that could potentially be read as misleading?
Oh, okay. I think probably at the time I wouldn't have read any great significance into that statement.
Why not?
I think again, because and say rightly or wrongly, I think in my mind it was I didn't think that K15 was a non-combustible product, but I didn't think that it would have a big contribution to the development of the fire.
Can I stop you, forgive me. On what basis did you think at the time that it would not have a big contribution to the development of a fire? Why do you say that?
I can't remember. I can't remember what my thoughts were exactly at the time.
No, fair enough.
I think I must have read. Sorry, I apologise.
Please go ahead.
I mean, I clearly would have read it at the time. May have had a discussion with George Lee about it. May have had other considerations, but I can't remember why it was included in those key factors assessed, because it normally wouldn't have a statement in there that then isn't repeated in the section 7, or just a straight reference to section 7.
Or in fact, that can't be founded in any kind of scientific or evidential data.
Yes.
Right. But I think you said earlier you didn't pick it up at the time, or you didn't read anything particularly significant into that wording.
I don't think so, no. I can't remember. I think if I had, we'd have omitted it.
Well, do you think you ought to have done? Looking back now,
with hindsight, yes. It obviously has caused confusion. So I don't think I at the time realised that it would cause confusion, but it's clearly, I think, probably would be better off without it in the certificate.
Given what you have just said, I think I do need to ask you this at this stage. On what basis do you say in October 2008 that you were competent to check statements about fire performance in BBA certificates?
I don't think I would be competent to check a fire related comment in that particular way. I was probably, I suppose you could say, competent in looking at BBA certificates in general, but I didn't have any competence in fire as such.
No.
And being able to read approved document B and the various standards and have some knowledge in that way.
All right, but not enough, is this right, to pick up that it might be ill-advised to state in the fire performance section of a certificate for a combustible product definitively that the product would not contribute to the development stages of a fire? Is it genuinely your evidence that did not strike you at the time as a significant or important statement?
I don't think it did. Not in that front summary. I think I would have perhaps attached more significance within section 7, but I realise that's not. It does appear in the certificate and therefore forms part of the certificate. But yeah,
I'm not sure that I do follow on that basis. And in relation to the answer you've just given, how could you possibly, as head of approvals, have any confidence that what was being said within the certificate about the fire performance or properties in fire of that product was correct and accurate? You were the last line of sign-off before the chief executive, were you not?
Yes.
So how could you have had confidence at the time that your own checks on the technical content of that certificate were good, were accurate, were adequate?
I think at the time I clearly thought they were, based on reading this section 7 and knowing something about what was in approved document B, but I can't really say any more, I don't think.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hunt. I'm going to ask you to stop there because, Mr. Chairman, I note the time.
Yes. Well, now, give me some help at this point. How much longer do you think you may require with Mr. Hunt?
I'm making fairly good progress, and I hope to be more than about an hour and a half in the morning, I'm afraid.
Another hour and a half?
I'm afraid so, possibly an hour.
Right. Well,
I think I'm being assisted. I think an hour is more realistic. I may be being overcautious.
well, I think whether it's an hour or an hour and a half, we're not going to carry on now with a view to finishing tonight. Mr. Hunt, I'm sorry about this because I think you were probably told that we'd managed to get through your evidence today. And that had been my hope. But clearly we're not going to manage to do that, even if we prolong the hearing a bit more than usual. So I'm going to have to ask you, I'm afraid, to come back tomorrow to continue your evidence. I hope that's not going to be too inconvenient.
No, that's fine for me, sir.
All right, well, that's very good. In that case, we'll stop now and we'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, please. And again, as before, please don't discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else overnight, all right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. And that's where we'll close the proceedings for today. We'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow.